Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today I am speaking with award-winning independent journalists Ali Winston and Darwin BondGraham, who have co-authored the book The Writers Come Out at Night: Brutality, Corruption, and Cover-Up in Oakland. If you've been listening to the show, you know this was one of my most anticipated books of 2023 because I am an Oakland native and any book about my city is important to me. The book examines the Oakland Police Department, which has been the subject of the United States' longest-running criminal reform program. Having followed the department and its stories for 13 years, Ali and Darwin have a lot to share with us about modern-day policing, state violence, and they try to talk about if it's even possible to truly reform a police department. Our January book club pick is Mariah Carey's autobiography, The Meaning of Mariah Carey, written with Michaela Angela Davis. We will discuss the book on January 25th with our guest, Chelsea Devontes. Quick reminder, everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. It's a new year, it's a new you, and if your resolution was to put a little money behind your favorite independent creators, I have just the thing for you. It's the Stacks Pack, which is the Stacks Patreon community. For as little as $5 a month, you earn perks like our virtual book club, access to our active Discord community, and bonus episodes. Plus, right now, till the end of January, you get our fantastic reading tracker. So if one of your other resolutions was to read more, this tracker is just the thing for you. More than that, you get to know that your money is going to support the work of The Stacks, which is a Black woman-run independent podcast all about books. It's super easy to join. Head to patreon.com/thestacks and be a part of the Stacks Pack. I'd like to say a huge thank you to some of our newest members of the Stacks Pack: Paige Cahill, Deirdre Purcell, Aaron Hennessy, Laura Sabian, Paulette Arazo, Gayla Matsuka, Kathleen Penner, and Bethany Berger. Thank you all so much, and thank you to every single member of the Stacks Pack. All right, now it's time for my conversation with Ali Winston and Darwin BondGraham. All right, everybody, I am very, very excited about today's guests. If you know me, if you've been listening to the show, you've heard me talk about this book a whole bunch at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. It's called The Writers Come Out at Night: Brutality, Corruption, and Cover-Up in Oakland. And I'm joined by both of the authors, Darwin BondGraham and Ali Winston. Welcome to the Stacks.
Hey.
Thanks so much for having us.
I'm so excited. Everyone know, I'm not everyone, but you all know, and most of my audience knows, I'm from Oakland. I'm a big anti-police person, so this book really speaks to all my biases and backgrounds. But I would love for you, one of you, to start just in about 30 seconds or so, tell everyone what this book is about.
Sure. I mean, this book is kind of a compendium of our decade plus of reporting together. It is a history of the Oakland Police Department, of Oakland as a city, and the city's struggle with the quandary of policing, police accountability, public safety, and the overall kind of underpinning question in this book is whether or not American law enforcement can be reformed in its current state.
I have questions about that.
Fire away.
But we'll come back to that. I want to ask you sort of really broadly, how did the idea of putting, because you're both reporters in the Bay Area, you both have been doing this work. How did it come to you to say, like, we want to write this, or this should be a book and we want to write it together and now's the time to do that?
Yeah, complicated answer, but basically boils down to, we were both writing for the all-weekly newspaper in Oakland for a long time, the East Bay Express. And, we would write these stories that were like, officers got drunk at a bar and wandered down the hill and committed a home invasion, and beat up the homeowners while they were blindingly drunk, or officer ran a red light and ran a motorcyclist over and then lied about it and blamed it on the motorcyclist. And even though, video contradicts that, and officers in the police department, shot someone in the head with a beanbag and then, avoided accountability. And we would write all these stories, and they were kind of they felt like these one-off, horrible things that happened. And we would have to shoehorn in this brief, explanation that, in a paragraph or so, that Oakland is under federal court oversight because actually these problems are, systemic and deeply ingrained in the history of the department. And there's a reform effort underway. And we, over time, we just got frustrated and realized like the only way to like really properly ever do this, is to treat this as like a book length project. So we knew we had to do it someday. The way it really came about was at different points, we both had a lot of free time. So a few years ago, I got laid off of my job at the time. Ali was freelancing. Also,
no, I was at the New York Times then.
Yeah, he was at the New York Times. We linked up then and we're like,
still faded.
Let's do the book. Then I got a new job and then Ali left the Times. But basically along the way, we just, fortuitously found the time and the space to actually do the research, interview the people and put it all together.
Got a good lawyer. We're able to sue the city for dozens, like 30 odd Open Public Record Act requests that we had in for old police incidents. There was a really important California law, SB 1492?
1421.
1421. 1492 was a different year. But 1421 was really important. It actually opened up older substantiated cases of police misconduct, the internal affairs files, to the public. There's been a progressive rollback of some of the secrecy laws around law enforcement records in California over the past 5-6 years or so. And it's really that our lawsuit, our lawyer, Sam Ferguson, really tore the city of Oakland a new one and actually set state precedent. He set state precedent for access of public records to these files. It was the first time that anybody had really tested the law out in the courts. And that enabled us to write about incidents, some of which we both covered extensively, but kind of, looking at it through a straw and really opened things up to us in a way that we didn't have access to beforehand. We also, because of this project and because of the way we shaped it, I'm going to get a little bit meta here. If you've ever read City of Courts, the Mike Davis History of Los Angeles, if your readers haven't, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best books about Southern California and urban history ever written, in the U.S. rather. And Mike Davis uses the history of the Los Angeles Police Department to explain the shape of Los Angeles as a society and as a metropolis in 1990, right before the Rodney King riots. And he uses the jackbooted LAPD of first Bill Parker and then Daryl Gates to kind of lay out how that social order came about and how the police were really the kind of gatekeepers of that social order. And in many ways, first of all, the book was kind of one of our templates for how to think about Oakland and how to think about the police as a central institution for the city and for the society as well, for control, not just control and ordering of society, but also controlling the disorder, allegedly. And we really looked at that book as kind of a template for us, and we wanted to do a little bit of a Northern California version of City of Courts. And in many, many, many ways, Los Angeles and Oakland have a lot of parallels. It's not just in the two police departments. OPD is like a little LAPD. That's how I think of it as an East Coaster.
Well, I live in LA and I'm from Oakland, so I feel like the police are the same. And I lived in New York City, so I feel like those three police departments have really done a lot to really make police look great in this country. Just a brief tangent, because you said you wrote for the New York Times. Did you do the police beat there, like the crime
I covered the
beat?
NYPD. I grew up in New York City, and I moved back to New York to cover the NYPD ostensibly as an investigative reporter. It was a bit of a bait and switch, and not all honesty, I was very, very unhappy in the Metro section, or what was left of it. They ended up basically gutting it. But no, the way in which law enforcement was covered, having covered it on the West Coast in a place where, honestly, like the NYPD is a pretty shitty department. No. Like the physical standards are awful. Individual cops have terrible training. They basically hire for numbers. They don't hire for quality. Pound for pound, like, all right, so just objectively in law enforcement, pound for pound, a California highway patrolman or a Fresno County sheriff is worth 6 NYPD officers just because of what they're trained to do tactically, the amount of money that they earn, the time that they get trained up on, what they are required to do in their day-to-day job, the fact that if you're handling a patrol car in California and you're expected to go on high-speed chases and whatnot, you have to be able to handle a Ford Explorer, Ford Interceptor at high speeds, tight turns, pit maneuvers. The cops in New York City can barely hit the target. They might not even know where the safety is on their Glock.
What a ringing endorsement. I want to ask a little bit about the Oakland Police Department specifically. As I mentioned, I'm from Oakland. And one of the things that I remember, I was born in 1986. So I was sort of growing up in Oakland, and a lot of the times in the book that you talk about was like really high crime. And I remember like Oakland was, I don't know if it actually was, but it was the murder capital of America at some point in my lifetime or close to it, like, and it was like, it was treated the way that like people talk about Chicago and Detroit right now. And I always believed that to be true, but in reading your book and in reading like so many different stories of police officers lying and making stuff up and saying that there was a crime being committed that wasn't, and arresting someone who was, asking for help or whatever that looks like. Was it really that bad? Like, was Oakland really a truly crime infested place, or was it some of it like added on? And I'm asking that genuinely because I remember in my mind being sort of scared of Oakland as a kid. And now I'm like, Oakland's so different. It really doesn't feel, I mean, same in some places and same, but has like a different PR spin than it used to. Like Oakland's whole image when I was a kid was like, Oakland is a terrible place and it's violent and it's dirty and it's horrible. And now it's like, Oakland is Brooklyn. And I love Oakland. I just want to say Oakland is the greatest place on earth. Okay, I'm done.
We love Oakland too. The answer is both. In the 80s and the 90s, Oakland was a very dangerous place. And it was primarily dangerous for lower income African American and Latino residents. They were the people who experienced the highest rates of gun violence, robberies, rapes, burglaries, other crimes. They were the people who also experienced the highest intensity of environmental racism, of ongoing housing discrimination, job discrimination, other forms of systemic racism. This all combined to make Oakland, by the 1980s and going into the 90s, yes, a very dangerous place, and dangerous for the people who lived there. It was also somewhat dangerous to be a police officer during those decades. It's also true that the police department at the time, there were some officers, there were some squads, there were some leaders who were genuinely committed to trying to create better community relations. In the 90s, Oakland had an increasing number of police officers who were like born and raised in the city or were African American or Latino, and like they wanted to make a different kind of department than what it had historically been. And they ran up against other people in the department who primarily lived in the suburbs and had a more sort of like military notion of like what policing should be, go in and occupy the streets, command and control, use physical force to like dominate people. So yeah, it really was both a very dangerous place. And also there was in fact like a very biased regional media narrative that kind of like demonized Oakland. I remember this because I grew up in the North Bay in Sonoma County, and I recall being in junior high and high school, and you would hear about Oakland, and it was people talked about it as some like very like dangerous place that you probably didn't want to go to. I went several times when I was a kid, and I would go down to the Bay Area and visit San Francisco or Oakland, and I was a skateboarder and rollerblader, and we used to come down to the cities and just like hang out. And I loved Oakland at the time, but like as a visitor and a white person coming in from the outside, it wasn't a dangerous place for me. And I kind of knew that and felt that at the time.
Yeah, I think that there's also, San Francisco had a lot of problems during the 80s and 90s as well. But the thing about the difference between San Francisco and Oakland is San Francisco had and still does have the preponderance of the white collar jobs in the region, right? The media interests like the Chronicle and the Examiner and most of the local public broadcaster are based in San Francisco. San Francisco law firms are the white collar firms in San Francisco, especially those big finance firms and law firms, have an interest in keeping San Francisco's image shined up. So one way in which they would kind of deflect attention off San Francisco was to play up the problems in Oakland. And San Francisco really, the problems facing Latino and African American communities in San Francisco were very deep during those periods of time. And I do think that Oakland did, because of the city's, predominantly African American. And as you know, during the crack era, the entire dialogue about super predators and whatnot really fell down on young Black youth. That being said, Oakland was an extremely violent place in the 80s and 1990s, predominantly in the flatlands. A lot of it was driven by the narcotics trade. We document some of the players in that era. There's a chapter in our book called Small Wars, taken from a really good San Francisco Examiner series by our colleagues Carla Marinucci and Lance Williams. And it kind of lays out, like, they spent months on the street just talking to the young men involved in this trade and, like, just showing, hey, look, this is actually what it looks like on these flats. You may not see this up in the hills up above Interstate 580, which is kind of the demarcation line, still is between, for people who aren't familiar with the Bay Area, like, Oakland is weird. There's, like, uphill and downhill. The hills are where the wealthy people congregate, where wealthy people live, good schools, predominantly nice leafy hillsides. It's very idyllic. And then below 580 is the flat. That's trending towards the flatlands. That is the flatlands, which were predominantly Black and Latino, increasingly Asian now. There's gentrification in some parts of it too, but those were and still are the areas impacted by the majority of, like, poverty and violence and just a lot of the issues that still plague Oakland to this day. So there were always issues there, but the police department, it's also important to note that, like, that older culture that Darwin was talking about earlier, that resistance, that kind of hard-edged, blunt-nosed, jackbooted policing culture, that's an old thing. It's a white thing as well, predominantly white. It goes back to the Second World War and beforehand. A lot of the families in Oakland, there's a lot of legacy families. Mm-hmm. And underneath the surface of the department, that stuff is always present. There's always this core that pushes up against the people who want the department to be something different. There are always the people, and this is not just Oakland, it's constant in other departments. They say, well, these are our traditions and this is our culture, paramilitary culture, and we want it to stay like this because that's what worked, what they think worked.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Is there something inherently wrong or flawed or interesting about the Oakland Police Department that makes it stand out against other police departments to you all? Or is this just where you live in your beat and what you work on? Like, I guess is sort of the question. Like, why Oakland? As some more succinct.
Yeah. We wrote a whole book about how terrible the Oakland Police Department is, but I'm going to tell you, the Oakland Police Department is actually one of the most professional and best police departments in the country.
No!
That's right.
Darwin! Oh!
It's sort of a weird, it's like a weird whiplash thing to say, but, why
are you giving away all the chapter titles?
I know. But yeah, like, I mean, the reason I say that is because, like, a lot of what we were grappling with in writing this book was, we want to present Oakland as a case study, right? And, like, compare it to Los Angeles, Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans, St. Louis, all these other cities all over, even states and rural areas, just like law enforcement in general. This is a case study of law enforcement. But, we kind of had to deal with the fact that, like, in some ways, Oakland is an outlier. So Oakland is an outlier in the sense that, like, it's been under federal court oversight to reform its police department probably longer than anywhere else. It's also an outlier in the sense that, like, even before the consent decree was imposed in 2003, what was happening in Oakland was probably more efforts by civil society, like civil rights attorneys, activists, groups, like everybody from, like, the Panthers to, like, Brown Power groups to, like, students and just all these organizations and people and activists and citizenry putting tons of pressure on the police department to change, creating a police oversight board, one of the first ones in the country, strengthening it over time. And so there was just this huge amount of effort to, like, to do two things: to dig up the secrets in the department and make it really transparent, and to change it. And I think the thing about Oakland is we know a lot more about its police department because the curtain's been pulled back in a way that you don't see with a lot of other police agencies, especially smaller ones in, like, rural areas and suburban areas. But even some of the, like, other big city police departments, we haven't seen this, like, revealing of the secrets to the same degree. So Oakland on the surface, it seems a lot worse, but really it's a lot like a lot of other police departments in the country, maybe even a little bit better, actually.
I would say that to add to all that, one of the aspects about the Oakland Police Department, being in a major media market does not hurt, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The Bay Area is a relatively large metropolitan area, even though it kind of seems outside like the New York and Los Angeles kind of duopoly of coastal media. But one thing that does make Oakland really interesting, as someone who grew up in New York, has lived in SoCal, Chicago, DC as well, overseas, is that Oakland is a little bit ahead of the rest of the country when it comes to policing and law enforcement and the reaction against it. So 1950, right? Or let's rewind a bit. That's the state legislature, California state legislature, holds a series of investigative hearings into police abuses of the African American community in the city. First of its kind that we've been able to figure out in the state of California and maybe the country. That comes about because of agitation by a lot of left-wing lawyers, some of them tied in with the Communist Party, really kind of showing that the agitation, that like very involved, committed, on boots on the ground type activism is not a recent thing in Oakland, but tracks back quite some ways. Then the formation of the Black Panther Party in Oakland in reaction to the Oakland Police Department's just entire approach to the African American community was also, went hand in hand with the anti-war radicals in the 1960s. The Bay Area was a hotbed of protest against not just the war in Vietnam, but the power structure, right, of the country at the time. Seth Rosenfeld's book Subversives is a brilliant account of the period. We drew on that quite heavily. Again, another author who fought, I don't know how long his legal battle was for his records, but no. I mean, I think he fought for decades to get some of his FOIA suits answered. And then 1980, Melvin Black is killed by the Oakland Police Department, unarmed young black teenager running away from the cops. John Burris, who's one of the civil rights attorneys who helped bring the Oakland Police Department under this court agreement instead of the Department of Justice, the absence of the federal and state authorities and helping reform the police department here is something we can talk about down the road. It's really conspicuous. And, the agitation over Melvin Black's shooting and Burris's report, who's, a former prosecutor at the time, then turned defense attorney, he really kind of lays out that this guy was killed in cold blood and helps provide the impetus for a movement that leads to the formation of Oakland's Police Review Board. 2009, Oscar Grant's murdered on a train platform.
Yes.
New Year's Day, 2009, by a Bay Area rapid transit police officer. He's not an OPD officer, but the weeks and months of protest that kick off very, very, very tumultuous protests that I was in the midst of, and it was really a remarkable time. That's an moment for the Black Lives Matters movement. And a lot of the attention on law enforcement and police misconduct and the killing of an armed young black man did end up turning back on the Oakland Police Department, which had their own litany of police shootings and unjustified brutality and so forth that, was one of the issues which I really kind of cottoned on to when I first started reporting on OPD in the late 2000s. So in this sense, and Black Lives Matter, the formal movement, comes around like 3 or 4 years later. Yeah. So in a way, Oakland is trending ahead of the rest of the country. And you'll see this throughout the narrative of the book in terms of the developments that you see later on in like Ferguson and elsewhere like that.
I was on BART that night, not that train, obviously, but I was New Year's Eve. So we went to sneakers only party in San Francisco. I don't know if you guys, I don't think they still do it, but you'd have to get dressed up and then you had to wear sneakers only. And if you wore heels or like dress shoes, you had to pay more to get in. Anyways, I just, obviously I remember that night so vividly because you wake up the next morning and you hear the story of like something's happened. And, we were parked at West Oakland BART and just like the craziness of, we were parked at the lake. Anyways, but the craziness of like, we could have been there, anyways, not to make this about me, but every time I hear his name, I'm always like, ugh. That being said, let's take a quick break and then we'll come right back. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. I want to touch on what you brought up, Ali, about the federal oversight being lacking in Oakland and what was going on. Can you speak a little bit to that? Like, is that is obviously not typical. You're making the big eyes of like, I could speak for hours on that. So I'm going to hold you to keep it tight, but I would love for you to share like why that is conspicuous to you. What does that say? What does that mean? Why would they not be around?
That's a very, this story I don't think has really been told. This aspect of the Ryder story really hasn't come out. Or is not in the public consciousness. Maybe because it's 20 years ago, but I think because no one really examined this question.
Wait, sorry, we should, before I let you go, the Riders is the name of, this is the title of your book, but they are like a group of Oakland police officers who are they're like a cop gang.
They're a cop gang.
Yeah, like we have them here in LA, the sheriff's department, there's gangs down here. And basically they were a bunch of really abusive, harassing, violent, they tortured people, they killed people, they arrested people, and they were called the Riders. And so by the people of Oakland, like the people they were harassing would call them like the Riders, and so the Riders would come out at night. Anyways, so that's what you're talking about. I realized we never did that. In a normal interview, they'd probably be like, tell us, what is a Rider? But here we are. We've made it 25 minutes in. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. And the Riders, so that name was actually given to them. They heard, the story is, urban legend is that they pulled over an African-American man, and one cop pulls him over during the day in West Oakland, gives the man a ticket, writes him up for a violation. And the driver says to him, thank you. He says, the cop's confused. He says, what are you thanking me for? I just wrote you up. He says, no, thank you for being so nice. You know, they're not like this. He says, who? He says, well, the day, you know, if I got at night, they're not like this. That's when the Riders come out. Right? And that's how there's a long term of African Americans referring to white vigilantes as night riders in the South and elsewhere in the country. We don't know the origin of that term in Oakland, but it's stuck. The police, that story rattled around the locker room in West Oakland, and this group of cops, Clarence Chuck Mabinag, Jude Siapno, Frank Vasquez, and Matt Horn, among others. There were many others, but those are the four who were formally accused in court of being the Riders, engaged in a litany of abuses against West Oakland residents. They framed them up for narcotics possession, pummeled them into submission, kidnapped some people, just brutalized them So if your listeners have seen the film Training Day, this was Training Day.
Yeah.
Northern California Training Day.
Planted drugs and guns, falsified reports, all the good stuff that any one cop could be doing at any one time, they were all doing together as a gang of friends and horrible men.
That's right. They signed a softball even.
Yeah.
And they would pass around a softball.
What a great
signed with their nicknames. And then said the Riders on it. That was a piece of evidence used against them in a criminal trial.
So cute.
The Department of Justice, back to your bigger question. When the time came around, a young cop named Keith Batt, who was training with the Riders in the summer of 2000, was horrified at what he saw and just had a crisis of conscience and blew the whistle and turned them into the Internal Affairs Division. And these officers were investigated by the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. And when they were being investigated by the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, because the alleged incidents, the allegations made involved egregious civil rights abuses, the deputy DA, David Hollister, was cross-designated as a United States Attorney, an assistant United States Attorney by the District of Northern California. And there was an ADA as well, who later rose up to run that office. She did quite well for herself. Who was also cross-designated on that case. And when they were done, when Hollister and his investigator, Bob Connor, were done working back through all Keith Batt's allegations and building up their evidence, when they built it up, they came in, they went to the federal offices on Golden Gate Avenue in this tall, imposing building. They went up to the U.S. Attorney's floor, to his office, and they sat down across his desk and put the file in front of him. And the U.S. Attorney at the time was Robert Mueller, who later went on to run the FBI and went on to play a major role in one of the investigations of Donald J. Trump. So Mueller took a look through the files, looked through the witnesses' backgrounds and their histories and criminal histories. And some of these guys had rap sheets as long as my arm because they were in the street. That's just who the Riders were jacking up. They were jacking up people who were out on the streets, some of whom may or may not have been involved in the narcotics trade. And Mueller looked at his histories, pushed the file back towards Hollister, and said, "I wish you the best of luck." And the subtext that Hollister told us was that he didn't want to take a case where he'd be putting the word of 4 officers, some of whom were highly decorated, up against a group of people with questionable criminal histories. Now, it's worth pointing out that in a similar scandal, the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force scandal that broke out a couple years back, many of the people who testified against the police officers in that case, who were convicted and sent to federal prison, did have criminal histories and did have pasts as drug dealers and people who dealt in weight, not just, a bindle here, twist a crack there, like these guys did. The case could have been made, but different times, different mores, so be it.
So obviously you guys have done tons of research and work. I should point out in the book, one of the things that I really love is how much history of Oakland is in this book. You guys sort of, maybe like chapter 4-ish, you sort of start bringing in the history of Oakland and kind of work through. There were things that I learned, like I had no idea Earl Warren was a DA in Oakland. I was like, really? We have whoa, fancy. And I didn't know that. I knew that Oakland was a racist place, but I didn't know that the Klan was so active in Oakland. Just little things like that, where it's like you grow up in a place and you know a lot about it and you can feel the dynamics, but you don't always know the details. So I really appreciated those, I think 3 chapters kind of back to back to back that really went into, took us up to the 1990s or early 2000s or so. Which I think is really cool because I think you do obviously need that to kind of tell this story. But I'm curious to hear what you all say to people who feel that the stories in this book are just examples of bad apples, or even that the Oakland Police Department is a bad apple police department amidst other fantastic police departments, and that's why they're under federal oversight, right? That it's a problem department and a problem culture and not anything bigger than that. And maybe we shouldn't be worried about a bad seed, which is what we hear all the time. I'm smiling because I'm trying really hard to pretend like this argument is valid, but I'd love to hear your all's pushback or response to that if there is any.
Sure. The claim that, or the theory that there are bad apples and that they make the bunch or the barrel of apples look bad, that rests on for that to be true, there would have to be just few bad apples, right?
Right.
In Oakland, in 2016, there was a week period in which 3 police chiefs had to resign because they all had horrible skeletons in their closet.
Right.
And the mayor at the time, Libby Schaff, could not find a person within the Oakland Police Department or even externally in another Bay Area police department, a sworn officer, she could not find one to run the Oakland Police Department because so many officers were just damaged goods because their files had these kinds of secrets in them. They had engaged in some kind of behavior years ago, or they had just done something horrible, and they were just unfit to be police chief. And so she had to appoint her city administrator, Sabrina Landreth, to become the police chief for a while. If you look systematically at any police department, like we did with the Oakland Police Department, it quickly becomes clear that it's not a matter of bad apples. It's a matter of toxic cultures and systemic problems that are deeply ingrained and that are handed down through to the present from these problems in history. Like, for example, in Oakland, the fact that the city would not hire anyone other than a white man to be a police officer up until really about the 1960s, early 70s, when they started to diversify. The fact that the department remained all the way through the 1990s a place that openly tolerated homophobia and misogyny. It was a very hostile workplace for women. So the evidence of like systemic cultural problems in policing, institutional problems in policing, we think it's overwhelming. And the bad apples argument, maybe there are some departments out there that are like, mostly great and very professional and have very few like serious scandals. And then maybe one officer comes along and does something and makes everybody look really bad. Maybe that's the case here or there. If that were the case in Oakland, I don't think the department would have been placed under federal court oversight, 20 years ago, and then repeatedly have failed to fulfill that mission with not just like failing to check the boxes on the technical reforms, but like having explosive and egregious scandals of abuse, like, multiple officers sex trafficking a, 17, 18-year-old girl, multiple
cover up of another officer's wife who killed herself allegedly in extremely suspicious circumstances, and then the same officer goes on to kill himself.
Or officers going out to police a protest and just unleashing such horrific force on the protesters that they end up almost killing an Iraq war vet, and then
lying about it afterwards, coordinating their lies.
So the bad apples argument, I mean, people can make it, but it really kind of stretches. It doesn't line up with the reality. And I think that's the reason we tried to write a history and just describe what happened. And, I know some people will read our book and be like, this is kind of tedious. We keep going through a bunch of these like incidents and like, you're just like pouring on the detail and there's all these citations. The reason we did that is because we wanted to really show people rather than like tell them, what the issue is.
This is sort of where we started. And I did say I wanted to circle back to this. And I will preface this by saying, in the last few years, I have done a lot of reading and we've had a lot of people on the show who are police and prison abolitionists, from Miriam Kaba to Derica Purnell. Last year, we read Prison by Any Other Name by Victoria Law and Maya Chenwar. And so, people who listen to the show will be familiar with a lot of sort of those abolitionist talking points that have really been transformational in how I think about the police, and especially how I think about the idea of reform. And so I want to ask you both, can this be reformed in a way that is actually a reformation or a way that would change in a goal to do better, as opposed to a reform that just is bullshit that has to be, I think what Miriam Kaba told me was like, we want reforms that we don't have to then reform again, right? Like if the reforms are working towards a goal of doing better by the communities, then those reforms, like defund the police, is technically a reform, right? Like it's not a full abolition, but it is a reform. Anyways, so that being said, do you see a road towards reforming the Oakland Police Department specifically, or police departments generally, as two people who cover the police? You should know the police better than anyone else, right? So what do you think?
We're not, we don't take a position on these debates around what should be done to the police.
I guess what could be done. Is it possible?
Yeah,
Or can you not take a stand on that either?
I mean, we could, but the thing is, we just don't feel comfortable doing it because, first off, who are we? Like, there are a lot of leaders out there with a lot of great ideas and a lot of initiative who are going to propose all kinds of like transformative stuff. And we're two investigative journalists. And so the way we view our role is we take a really hard look at society. We dig for documents, we talk to sources, and we're trying to tell people what we're seeing. And so this might be not quite the answer to your question, but like what we did see in Oakland, having spent, a decade plus, looking really long and hard at the police department, at the city, the context that the police operate in, what we do see is a department that has changed a lot. It did not change because like one day the cops woke up and were like, it'd be really great if we had better relations with the community and we like killed fewer people and we like locked fewer people in prison. That would just be great. No, the police did not do that. Maybe some people in the department did kind of feel that way. A lot of them didn't. The political leadership of the city did not have an epiphany one day that like, reform or transformation is the right thing to do. 2 years ago, the political leadership of Oakland, the city council, they voted to defund the police budget by half, by $150 million. In theory, a year later, when they actually got to making the budget vote, they increased the police budget. So awesome. The political leadership in Oakland, like a lot of cities in this country, the police departments there, they have never on their own said like, we're going to transform policing, we're going to make it better. The way that the Oakland Police Department got better, and let me give you one example of what I mean by got better. It used to be that like well over a dozen people were killed every year by the Oakland Police Department, usually in an quote unquote officer involved shooting, right? Like where an officer is like chasing someone and shoots them and kills them. And usually one or two or three of those people were totally unarmed, and the circumstances were extremely controversial. And that was a huge problem because those people were suspected of committing crimes. Maybe they were fleeing police. Maybe some of them were. Maybe some of them weren't. But they were killed and they weren't given a fair trial. They weren't given, right. It's a huge problem. And they're mostly people of color. Now, the Oakland Police Department usually only kills one or two people a year. Now, killing anyone, law enforcement, is a big deal, but that's a lot better than killing 14, 15 people in a year. The reason that happened is because of reforms that the department implemented. The only reason the department implemented those reforms is because they were forced to by the federal court overseers, by civil rights attorneys, by others who, and by social movements who put huge amounts of pressure on the police department. So the only reason things changed is because externally, civil society said, we want to transform policing. We want to change it. Now, some of the people putting up that pressure on the department are abolitionists who are saying defund the department. Some of them are like liberal reformers who are like, we just need a better police department that's more responsive, that has better technology. But altogether, what we're seeing when we look back on the history of policing in Oakland and how it's changed over time, that's what we saw. And that's what works. And that's how things do get better. Now, is better good enough? Are we at a point where institutional racism and policing is gone? No, we are not. And so can we ever get to that point? How do we get there? That's not something that Ali and I really, I don't know that we have an answer for that.
Yeah, I think that for me, our role really is to show the shape of the current problem, right? And to use Oakland as a way to focus in, show the proofs, show the mechanisms, show the granular detail of how things have gotten to the point that they've gotten to, what sort of remedies have been tried, how there's been kind of this one step forward, two steps backward pattern throughout history. There were reform attempts in the 70s. There were serious changes to the police department's efforts to recruit locally in the 80s and 1990s. There were points in time when the Oakland Police Department did have success in establishing trust with the community and were able to solve more crimes and help some of these people pushing for accountability and for police, for their tax dollars to actually bring them some public safety. Because let's be honest, some of the people pushing for police reform too are the victims of, are the relatives of somebody who was murdered 5, 10, 15 years ago. And that case is cold. That case is unsolved. And that's a very real aspect of all this. The bigger issue is the shape of the institution. And the institution as it is may not be reformable, may not be savable. But what will work, what has worked to a degree, what's gotten us to a better place is just relentless outside pressure and involvement and engagement from people in the community. This is not the sort of activism that, or engagement that you can have on a day-to-day, on a one day on, one day off basis, 1 month on, 6 months off basis. It's not a matter of going to one protest or posting a hashtag on social media. The changes that we've seen in Oakland come from people who are invested in this city and their community for weeks, years, decades. You know, these are people who are just there and present and paying attention to what's happening in their community. Insofar as what can be done, this is not a proscriptive book. We're not theorists. We're not prison abolitionists. We're not that sort of thinker. I know that we might get some flack from that. It's not our role. You know, we're not trying to be something that we're not.
Okay, let me ask you, let me just ask you guys what you think. Ali, I know you said that you're half Turkish, but you're both white presenting humans.
Right.
And I'm wondering, and you're both identify as male. And so I'm wondering, what do you think that you all are able to tell in this story or have access to that other reporters might not? And what do you think you guys miss out on as white men?
That's a great question. We didn't set out to write a book about what it's like to be brutalized by the police.
Sure.
Or we didn't set out to write a book about social movements against police violence, against institutional racism, although we do discuss those things in the book.
Yes.
What we wrote is a story of a police department. And I actually do think that being white men, college educated, professional reporters, I do think it provided us with a bit of like weaponry or armor, if you will, to like get inside the department and access some of its secrets that perhaps are inaccessible to other individuals because of their backgrounds and identities. So I think we're trying to like, in a way, like come at this and use, you know, our standpoint, our perspective to, again, provide information and what other people do with it, like how they take it and maybe use it to build a campaign or to advance a particular theory of social change or anything like that. We hope that they find it really useful. But yeah, in a way, like some of what we did is also limited by the fact of like who we are and like our perspective and where we're coming from in terms of like the issue of policing. Our book is, you know, it is and isn't a lot of it. There's a lot of things that it isn't and that it can't do. And I do really want people to know like that, you know, there are those limitations built into it. But if people really want to like open up a can of worms of like the police department, pull back the curtain on its secrets, like it's there. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, you know, one thing that we've always tried to do, and, you know, this is a little bit of media critique that you can take it or leave it, but we've tried to, throughout our careers, we've tried to make ourselves as transparent as possible. And what that means is we're not the story. Right. We try and let our work, if you read our work, you know, you hear us talk on the radio or you hear us speak in the individual. Yeah, we have personalities, we have our own dynamic. Like Darwin and I have our own interpersonal dynamic that we probably can't describe, but your listeners could, or people who know us could, or observed us down the years. But in terms of our actual product, we're not there. We're there in the writing of it. We're there in some of the perspective, but we try and let the facts speak as much as possible for readers as we can. And that's, you know, you can look at the back of the book. The citations are there. They're voluminous. We really tried to bring out as much of the truth, the best available version of the truth as possible. There's, you know, many truths there. Yes, Rashomon is a real thing. That idea of perspective and reality is refracted through the lens of individual experience. It's inevitable that happens.
Right.
However, you can try and surround a situation and report around it, find as many perspectives on that situation and really cut through it. I mean, I think that there's a case, our second chapter focuses around the beating of a young man, death of a young man who's beaten police custody and then dies of his injuries. And it's covered up for a decade. Jerry Amaro. We surrounded that story as much as possible. And it happened through many different perspectives. There were a dozen odd people on scene. And in order to try and get the best version of that extremely murky story, which, there's still unanswered questions that we have about it to this day, we really raked through as many records as possible that we turned up through old lawsuits, our Freedom of Information Act lawsuit itself, our own reporting, ipso post facto interviews with people who were there to get an idea of what happened. And that really is the sort of work journalism at its best can do, history at its best can do, when you really try and get at the ultimate truth of a situation and show your work as much as possible. That's really what we tried to get at.
One more thing on this question.
Yeah.
If, listeners want to learn more about policing in America, please read our book, but it's only going to take you so far. You mentioned Derica Purnell at the beginning of this. And that, that's her book is amazing. It's a, super critical take. People need to read that. A book I read, while we were writing this was Elizabeth Hinton's
America on Fire.
Well, I read that. Fantastic book. But I think an even more important book is the War on Poverty to the War on Crime. The way that I say this to say that a lot of the books that people need to read to understand policing and the problems of racial inequality in America are written by women and people of color. And so, I just read widely and read as diverse a text as you can. I hope ours is sprinkled in there somewhere. And I think people will learn a lot.
Before we get out of here, so you sort of stole one of my questions, which is what books would you recommend to folks? And so you have an intense notes bibliography section. So for folks who are reading the book, there's pages and pages of sources, and you just mentioned some, so we'll kind of skip over that one. But this is a question that I ask everybody, and it is deeply important to me, and you have to answer, which is when you write, where are you? How are you writing? Snacks and beverages, don't leave that out. Rituals, candles, set the scene for me. I know we're running out of time, so you have to do it kind of fast, but we have to know how you write, each of you.
So I spent for this book, I spent a lot of it working in the pandemic, first wave of the pandemic in my office in New York. Basically, I would ride down to my office and off Union Square and stand my desk up, set a little music up, listen to a little bit of a feed, have my notebook out in front of me, go through what I had written the day before. I had kind of this target to hit 600 words 600 words a day out minimum when we were going through the writing phase. It's not the research phase. But there'd be a pile of documents probably behind my notebook right over there. There'd be a stack of the books that I was reading through. City of Quartz, Shadow of the Panther, Golden Gulag, a bunch of these other books that we used. No There, American Babylon. They'd be piled up around me. Coffee, probably make 4 to 5 cups of that a day.
Black, cream, sugar?
Black like my soul.
Okay.
No, seriously, it was, but then, I'd go out, I'd make my own lunch. I'd come in and out of the day. I'd go out, take some walks, but I would try and keep on a 9 to 5 and just have a really steady rhythm. And that would also pertain to the reading as well, too. There would just be a way in which you'd have kind of your structure set up. We did set up a really solid outline for ourselves, and we would trade notes on that. And another thing, it's a collaborative process. Darwin and I have been writing so long that we honestly don't know each other's process anymore. It just happens, and we kind of go over the other. It really is second nature. It comes from reporting together for years and years and years. It's not typical, I think. And it makes, in a sense, this endeavor a little bit less lonely. So that's my view on it.
Okay. Darwin?
Yeah. A lot of evenings, a lot of weekends. Sometimes I would take a week off of work to plug away at this thing over time. Writing process. I had a giant kitchen table at the time as my desk. So it's just this massive table, documents spread everywhere for when I need them. Just my little laptop computer and, helped Ali write a huge portion of this book while living in the Theater Apartments in Oakland on 38th Avenue. Shout out to the Theater Apartments building. People from Oakland will know where that's at.
What about snacks and beverages, Darwin?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not good at eating and drinking.
Oh my gosh. What?
I can testify to that.
What a crazy sentence.
You know,
heard anything like that. Okay.
He gets really, really, really into it. No, but like it was interesting. It was like watching. I didn't really reflect that much over the years on our process. People would always ask us like, who wrote this sentence? Who wrote that sentence? I can't tell who wrote it. It's because that's the pattern. You would write through things. We talk about it. We'd be in constant communication with each other about the process. Right. And okay, well, this doesn't work. Okay, where does it work? Leave this section undone for now. We'll come back to this. We need this. We need that. It's really iterative. And, you know, any of your listeners who've worked in a collaborative setting, either in a research setting or a journalism setting, might recall this. It's like a fragment of a newsroom. But for a lot of our career, like when we were doing our reporting, you know, we would edit each other before our editors got to it.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, yeah. Speaking of editing, what's the word that each of you can never spell correctly on the first try?
I mean, lots of words, I think.
I have a lot. I'm a terrible speller, which is where the question came from.
Awkward.
Camaraderie. I can't remember whether it's
camaraderie.
Second vowel is an A or an E. It always confuses me in the back. Camaraderie. Yeah. But one thing about spelling and pronunciation, one way that you can distinguish a Californian from an East Coaster is by pronouncing the word C-A-U-G-H-T. Pronounce it.
Oh, caught.
Okay.
Or quat.
Now pronounce C-O-T.
Caught.
Bing. You said the same thing.
Yeah, they're the same. They're homonyms or whatever.
No, listen to it again. You'll hear it.
Caught and caught.
There you go.
Yeah. That in California, you say those words the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's a few other words like that.
Yeah,
like
ought,
ought, and I don't know. Anyways,
orange.
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 It's definitely an orange. Also, East Coasters say Philadelphians say bagel weird.
That's not a real place. Philadelphia is not a real place.
Oh, they say it weird.
I'll go down swinging on that. Let's go. Matt.
Great. I'm happy with that. Darwin, did you have a word or was yours also camaraderie?
I said awkward.
Oh, awkward is so hard for me too. Okay, here's my last question for each of you. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read The Writers Come Out at Night, who would you want it to be?
Well, so Mike Davis did read the book before he passed, and you know, we mentioned him already. He gave it a blurb, and we just have mad respect for him.
Give him a huge debt. Wish
he was still here with us. Deceased, but who hasn't read it?
I got one. Okay. There's a man named Gwyn Pearson, who was a Tuskegee airman and an Oakland police officer from the late 40s or early 50s through, I want to say the 70s. He got a doctorate in sociology and then became a professor of criminology at, I believe, Howard University was his last stop until he died of a heart attack in the early 1990s. He wrote a brilliant doctoral thesis on police culture, focusing on his experiences in the Oakland Police Department. We used his dissertation as some of our source material, and it was eye-popping. You know, he details basically this hard right, John Bircher Society type, hardcore to the police department, and outlines some really grim episodes in there and efforts to try and change the police culture, the ways in which the reformist chief was being beat back by the police union. I mean, it read almost like some of the articles that we wrote ourselves. And, you know, while reading this stuff through, I just kept thinking to myself, God, I wish he was around. I wish I had the chance to interview him. I wish I had half an hour with this guy, you know? Yeah. So I wish that Dr. Gwyn Pearson was around to read it.
Definitely. A couple other people, just real quick. Robert Truhaft and Decca Mitford. They were like, Truhaft was this radical civil rights attorney, and Decca Mitford was, you know, one of the Mitford sisters and this like a renowned author and social critic. And they were living in Oakland in the 40s and the 50s, and they were just like allies to a lot of communities that were taking a lot of heat from the Oakland Police Department, and they caused a lot of trouble for law enforcement by trying to hold them accountable back in the day. It'd just be really interesting if they were, somehow able to read this.
I love those answers. Thank you guys both so much. I know we went a little long, but I had too many. There's so many things on my list that we didn't even get to talk about, but I'm so grateful for your time and for you writing this book about my hometown, a place that I love and also hate in some ways because of a lot of the things that are detailed in your book, right? And the book is out now for folks who are listening. You can get it wherever you get your books. It's called The Writers Come Out at Night. Darwin, Ali, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Ollie Winston and Darwin BondGraham for joining us. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Debbie Norflus for helping make this conversation possible. Remember, our January book club selection is The Meaning of Mariah Carey, written by Mariah Carey with Michaela Angela Davis. We will discuss the book with Chelsea Devontes on Wednesday, January 25th. If you love this show and want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack. Make sure you're subscribed to the Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. For more from the Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter, and our website, thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Lauren Tyree. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.